Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. Treasury and IRS begin delivering second round of economic impact payments to millions of Americans. IR 2020-280, December 29th, 2020, Washington. Today, the Internal Revenue Service and the Treasury Department will begin delivering a second round of economic impact payments as part of the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2021 to millions of Americans who received the first round of payments earlier this year. So we have the second round of the economic impact payments at this point. So the initial direct deposit payment may begin arriving as early as tonight for some and will continue into next week. Paper checks will begin to be mailed tomorrow, Wednesday, December 30th. So now that they have the economic impact payments that went out the first time, they may be able to rely on that to some degree, the system that has been set up, in other words, in order to send out the second round of the economic impact payments. Obviously, if you have the electronic payment set up, in other words, if they can process it and give it directly into your account, that might be a faster process, and that might happen very shortly, it looks like. And then the paper checks will take a little bit longer to ship out than the paper checks. So the initial direct deposit payments may begin arriving as early as tonight for some and will continue next week. Paper checks will begin to be mailed tomorrow, Wednesday, December 30th. The IRS emphasizes that there is no action required by eligible individuals to receive this second payment. So there's nothing you need to do. And that also means that if you get any kind of scamming emails on this or phishing emails and whatnot saying that you do need to do something, then you typically can ignore those. You want to ignore those for the most part because obviously the phishing emails and the scamming stuff has gone up or some of it has been related to or they've been targeting on, some of these economic impact payments. So some Americans may see the direct deposit payments as pending or as provisional payments in their accounts before the official payment date of January 4th, 2021. The IRS reminds taxpayers that the payments are automatic and they should not contact their financial institutions or the IRS with payment timing questions. As with the first round of payments under the CARES Act, C-A-R-E-S Act, most recipients will receive these payments by direct deposit. The Social Security and other beneficiaries who receive the first round of payments via Direct Express, they will receive the second payment the same way. So obviously they have the first kind of economic impact payments that have been sent out. If you got the first economic impact payment, you would think that then you would be eligible for the second economic impact payment, and the IRS would already know the process to be providing that payment, which will most likely mirror the process that happened for the first economic impact payment. So anyone who received the first round of payments earlier this year but doesn't receive a payment via direct deposit will generally receive a check or, in some instances, a debit card. For those in this category, the payments will conclude in January. If additional legislation is enacted to provide for an additional amount, the economic impact payments that have been issued will be topped up as quickly as possible. So obviously, there's still kind of debates in terms of increasing more economic impact payments and whatnot, but it's good that they sent this out. They finally got this finalized, so they're going to send this out and then debate and see if there's going to be other economic impact payments that would continue to be going out, and if so, then we'll deal with that once those have been processed. But right now, we're processing these. So eligible individuals who did not receive an economic impact payment this year, either the first or second payment, will be able to claim it when they file their 2020 taxes in 2021. So they're kind of rushing out this second one still in 2020, and it's going to have the similar kind of concept that the first economic impact payment had, and that means they want to get it out as soon as possible, that being in 2020, but they're going to kind of tie it to the 2020 tax return, which is going to be filed in 2021, and therefore if there's any problems that happen with the amount of the payment or whether or not the payment went out, then they can reconcile those problems at the point in time that the 2020 tax returns are filed, hopefully, in 2021. So right now, the first economic impact payment, there's a recovery rebate credit, in other words, and that means that if you didn't get the correct amount of economic impact payment then in essence you get this kind of credit that could be happening in the 2020 tax year when you file in 2021. So similar kind of process, if not exactly the same type of process, most likely will be done with the second round here as well. So make sure to save your documentation so that when you provide it to the tax preparer, they have an idea of what has happened. For most people, the economic payments should be correct, so there shouldn't be much you need to do on the tax return. But if there's problems, then you want to make sure you have the documentation so that you can reconcile the problems at the point in time that you do your taxes for 2020 in 2021. So the IRS urges taxpayers who don't receive a payment this year to review the eligibility criteria when they file their 2020 taxes. Many people, including recent college graduates, may be eligible to claim it. So notice that the thing that kind of fell through the cracks here for a lot of people is they basically sent out an economic impact payment to everybody that has a social security number, and then there was kind of phase outs or possibly phase out limitations in terms of AGI limitations, like adjusted gross income limitations. But everybody that has a social security number, except if you're a dependent on someone else's tax return. So when we think of dependents, we're typically thinking normally children as a dependent, and if there was a dependent, then you get an added 500 if they're a qualifying child. That means one of the rules being under 17. However, if you're a dependent and say a student, for example, then you're going to be a dependent, so you didn't get the economic impact payment, and the person that claims you as a dependent didn't even get the $500 bump up for the dependent because they weren't an eligible child, meaning they were a dependent that was over the age of 17, typically being the rule that they didn't get to not be an eligible child. So it's quite possible then that these students in the prior year were dependents, or they were claimed as dependents on the prior year tax returns, and they're not claimed as a dependents. They are now completely independent at this point. And if they're independent, maybe then they would qualify possibly for the economic impact payments. So there might be, college students that become more independent for taxes, you would think more than normal, because it might qualify them for the economic impact payment. But in any case, if they're not, if they were a dependent in the prior year and they're not in the current year, then they may not have got an economic impact payment and may be eligible, and therefore possibly can reconcile that in the 2020 tax return. So just keep that in mind. That's one group that was affected possibly negatively or could have an impact in there and didn't get the economic impact payment in essence. Okay, so people will see the economic impact payment EIP, referred to as the recovery rebate credit, the RRC, on the Form 1040 or the Form 1040 SR, since the economic impact payments EIPs are an advance payment of the RRC. So the economic impact payment and the recovery rebate credit are basically linked together, right? The economic impact payment is basically the prepayment of the RRC, recovery rebate credit, that you would be getting when filing the 2020 return in 2021 had you not already received it in advance, because the IRS basically sent it out in advance, right? So they're giving, you can kind of think of the economic impact payments as an advance payment of the credits that are, you would have gotten it filing the tax return. So therefore, if you got it, you're not going to then get a recovery rebate credit, because that's basically the same thing as the economic impact payment, and you already got the economic impact payment. But if you didn't get the economic impact payment, then you may be eligible for the recovery rebate credit on the 2020 tax return you file in 2021. Quote, throughout this challenging year, the IRS has worked around the clock to provide economic impact payments and critical taxpayer services to the American people, end quote, said IRS Commissioner Chuck Reddick. Quote, we are working swiftly to distribute this second round of payments as quickly as possible. This work continues throughout the holidays and into the new year as we prepare for the upcoming filing season. We urge everyone to visit irs.gov, irs.gov, the IRS website, in the coming days for the latest information on these payments and for important information and assistance with filing their 2021 taxes, end quote. Authorized by the newly enacted COVID relief legislation, the second round of payments, or, quote, the EIP2, end quote, is generally $600 for singles and $1,200 for married couples filing a joint return. In addition, those with qualifying children will also receive $600 for each qualifying child. So dependents who are 17 and older are not eligible for the child payment. So we got basically the same scenario, and I think they of course wanted to map out the same scenario so that they can send out the economic impact payments that basically mirror what happened last time, because we went through all the issues in terms of who qualifies, and then they had stuff that if people visit this thing and tell them about an economic a child, then they would send the added payments. And they had things where basically if people hadn't filed their 2018 and 2019 tax return, they could tell the IRS. So all that information based on these criteria have been given to the IRS. So they basically want to mirror the same criteria in some case, in the basic case, so they can send it all out based on all the information they have gathered from the first round. So that means you got the same kind of issue with this 17 qualifying child. So that's usually one of the issues that they were having, whether or not someone has a qualifying child. If they had a qualifying child in the current year, meaning they didn't have it on the 2019 or 2018 tax return, but they had a new child, in the current year, or if someone was a qualifying child, or if someone was a dependent last year, like a student, but now they're not a dependent anymore, then those are the kind of issues that come up. And again, those are the things that you can fix on the first wave, and it looks like now the second wave of the economic impact payments when you file the tax return with the credit. Okay, so payments are automatic for eligible taxpayers. Payments are automatic for eligible taxpayers who filed a 2019 tax return, those who receive Social Security, retirement, survivor or disability benefits, SSDI, railroad retirement benefits, as well as Supplemental Security, SSI, and Veteran Affairs beneficiaries who didn't file a tax return. So basically, they're gonna base this on the prior year tax return. Now they're looking 2019. In the first round, if you didn't file 2019, they kind of looked back to 2018. But they're thinking at this point, it looks like, hey, you should have filed 2019 if you were to file it. If you're not required to file the tax return, then you still might get the economic impact payment because the IRS knows about you through other possible payments that could have gone out, such as Social Security benefits, survivor or disability benefits, and so on. And therefore, they have the criteria necessary to send out at least the base payment. So that you should still get a payment and shouldn't basically have to do anything if you didn't file in those cases as well. You can use as an indicator whether or not you got the first round of economic impact payments to see whether or not, or guess whether or not they'll get it right and send those payments out in the second round. So payments are also automatic for anyone who successfully registered for the first payment online at irs.gov using the agency's non-filers tool for November 21st, 2020, or who submitted a simplified tax return that has processed by the IRS. So, and the first round of payments for those people that didn't get the payment because they didn't file the tax return and the IRS did not send them out based on the Social Security number, the Social Security payments or the survivor disability payments and whatnot, then the IRS set up this system where you can go on and tell them the basic information necessary to send the payment that was on the non-filer tool that they put online. And if you successfully went on to the non-filer tool and gave them your information, even though you're not required to file a tax return and they didn't send it out because of any of these other beneficiary payments, then they should have sent out the first payment based on that. And now they already have that information again. So if you successfully got that done in the first wave, then they should be able to send it out now. Now, if you didn't submit the 2019 tax return or 2018 in the prior wave, and you were required to do so, you just didn't do it, then they would want you to actually, fill out the tax returns for 2018 and 2019. So if you didn't get the economic impact payment because you didn't do the 2018 and 2019 returns and you were required to do so, and then subsequently you did do those tax returns, once those are processed, then hopefully the payments will then go out for those individuals as well, and that should trigger both payments to be eligible at that point. So, okay. So who is eligible for the second economic impact payment? Generally, U.S. citizens and resident aliens who are not eligible to be claimed as a dependent on someone else's income tax return or eligible for the second payment. So eligible individuals will automatically receive an economic impact payment up to $600 for individuals or $1,200 for married couples and up to $600 for each qualifying child. Generally, you have adjusted gross income for 2019 of up to $75,000 for individuals and up to $150,000 for married couples filing joint returns and surviving spouses. So we have that income limitation there, the AGI phase out basically going on at $75,000 for individuals, $150,000 for married couples filing joint. Obviously, those phase outs are going to be based on the 2019 numbers because that's what they have, and those caps or those phase outs may be different, in 2020. But in any case, we're going to say 150 filing returns for so $150,000 for married couples filing joint returns and surviving spouses. You will receive the full amount of the second payment. For filers with income above those amounts, the payment amount is reduced. So they're going to phase out above that amount. So how do I find out if the IRS is sending me a payment? People can check the status of both their first and second payments by using the Get My Payment tool. So you can find that on the IRS website. It's available in English and Spanish only on irs.gov, irs.gov. The tool is being updated with new information, and the IRS anticipates the tool will be available again in a few days for taxpayers. So they don't have it quite up and running for the second one yet, but they're going to have it up and running in a couple days. So how will the IRS know where to send my payment? What if I changed my bank accounts? So the IRS will use the data already in our systems to send the new payments. Taxpayers with direct deposit information on file will receive the payment that way. For those without current direct deposit information on file, they will receive the payments as a check or debit card in the mail. For those eligible but who didn't receive the payment for any reason, it can be claimed by filing the 2020 tax return in 2021. So they're going to send it out to whatever source they have. If they got a direct deposit, they'll use that. If not, they're going to use a check if they know your address. If you don't get it for any reason, then you may have to file the 2020 tax return in 2021, where you can basically pick it up with the credit that will be tied to the economic impact payment at that time. So remember that the economic impact payment are an advance payment of what will be called the recovery rebate credit. So the recovery rebate credit, same thing, economic impact payment. You can think of those as intimately tied together, basically. And that's going to be filed on the 2020 Form 1040 or Form 1040 SR. Will people receive a paper check or a debit card? For those who don't receive a direct deposit by early January, they should watch their mail for either a paper check or debit card. The speed delivery of the payments to reach as many people as soon as possible. The Bureau of the Fiscal Service, part of the Treasury Department, will be sending a limited number of payments out by debit card. Please note that the form of payment for the second mailed EIP economic impact payment may be different than for the first mailed economic impact payment. So the form of payment may be different if you're not getting like the direct deposit, debit card or check, it looks like. Some people who received a paper check last time might receive a debit card this time, and some people who received a debit card last time may receive a paper check. IRS, so that they like to keep you guessing right here. It's kind of a surprise for them. So you get a little anticipation. So IRS and Treasury urge eligible people who didn't receive a direct deposit to watch their mail carefully during the second period for a check or an economic payment card, which is sponsored by the Treasury Department's Bureau of the Fiscal Service and is issued by the IRS, by the Treasury's financial agent. That's Beta Bank. That's B-E-T-A Bank, B-A-N-K. And that's in Nevada. The economic impact payment card will be sent in a white envelope that prominently displays the U.S. Department of the Treasury seal. So it has the Visa name on the front of the card and the issuing bank, Beta Bank, B-E-T-A Bank, on the back of the card. Information included with the card will explain that this is your economic impact payment. More information about these cards is available at eipcard.com. There's a link to that here. So if you get a card and you're like, this is weird, I don't know, I mean, I'm not used to getting like a payment card, then you might want to check this link just to make sure it's not a scam. Just make sure that you go directly to the IRS website here. So we'll have a link going to the IRS website, or you can go directly to the IRS website if you don't trust our link either. And you can go there and you can look it up, the EIP card, and get more information on it. So are more people eligible now for the payment than before? Under the earlier CARES Act, joint returns of couples where only one member of the couple had a Social Security number were generally ineligible for a payment unless they were a member of the military. There's a link to that here. But this month's new law changes and expands that provision, and more people are now eligible. In this situation, these families will now be eligible to receive payments for the taxpayer and qualifying children of the family who have work-eligible SSN Social Security numbers. People in the group who don't receive an economic impact payment can claim this when they file their 2020 taxes under the recovery rebate credit. All right, is any action needed by the Social Security beneficiaries, railroad retirement, and those receiving veterans benefits who are not typically required to file a tax return? So what if I don't file a tax return? How do they know about me? Well, if you get Social Security beneficiary, railroad retirees, or those receiving veterans benefits, then they kind of know a little bit about you, and hopefully they'll be able to send out the economic impact payment as hopefully they did in the first wave. So most Social Security retirement and disability beneficiaries, railroad retirees, and those receiving veterans benefits do not need to take any action to receive a payment. So hopefully you don't have to do anything to get the payment at this point. And even if you did have to do anything, possibly you did it last time on the first round, and they should have that information at this point again. So earlier this year, the IRS worked directly with the relevant federal agencies to obtain the information needed to send out the new payments the same way benefits for this group are normally paid. For eligible people in this group who didn't receive a payment for any reason, they can file the 2020 tax return and get the credit. If you don't get the payment, get the credit, but you should get the payment. So, and note, obviously, this group of people aren't used to filing the tax return. They don't typically need to file the tax return, and they should have got the payment anyways. But if you didn't get the payment, then the way to get it is you have to file the tax return. So you'd have to file the tax return, which should be a basic tax return, in order to get the recovery rebate credit. So it says, next question, I don't file a tax return and didn't register with the IRS.gov non-filer tool. Am I eligible for a payment? Yes, if you meet the eligibility requirement, while you won't receive an automatic payment now, you can still claim the equivalent recovery rebate credit when you file your 2020 federal income tax return. So these people, if there's people that don't file the tax return, so I didn't file the tax return and didn't register with the IRS non-filers. So if you didn't file the tax return, like for 2019, and you're not required to file the tax return, and because you're below the income threshold to need to do so, and you're not receiving like Social Security benefits or anything like that, so the IRS knows where to send a check to you, then the IRS was hoping that you're going to use the non-filer tool last time when they sent out the first economic impact payments. So if you did that, if you signed up for the non-filer tool, then you should be okay and you should get the economic impact payments. If you didn't file the tax return and you're required to file the tax return, you just didn't do it for 2019, then they don't want you to use the non-filer tool. They didn't want you. It's no longer available. But you couldn't have used it or they didn't want you to use it because that would confuse them. They want you to file the actual 2019 tax return. So in that case, then you may not get the economic impact payment, but you should be able to still recover it then by filing the tax return in 2020 in the form of the recovery rebate credit. So will I receive anything for my tax records showing I received a second economic impact payment? Yes. People will receive an IRS notice or letter after they receive a payment telling them the amount of their payment. They should keep this for their tax records. So you want to keep this information for your tax records. For most people, hopefully, then it's not really a problem because you got the correct amount of payment, and so everything is worked out. But if the payment is wrong for whatever reason, you want to have evidence of the payment to give it to the tax professional, or to use it when you do your own taxes to make sure you can get the recovery rebate credit. So where can I get more information? For more information about the economic impact payments and the 2020 recovery rebate, key information will be posted on irs.gov/EIP. There's a link to that here. Later this week, you may check the status of your payments at irs.gov/getmypayment. There's a link to that here. For other COVID-19 related tax relief, visit irs.gov/coronavirus. There's a link to that here. There'll be a link to this in the description.